Hey guys, I'm getting a lot of questions about how I put 33-inch Tarashi Aztecs on a 2023 Outlander. The first thing to do is make sure you get a pretty narrow offset wheel. So these are 6 plus 1 inch offset. I ended up adding a 1 inch reel spacer, which makes them a 5 plus 2. And that seems to get it in the perfect spot to maximize the clearance. Tire sticks out a little bit, but it's pretty square with the front. The front, I'm running a 6 plus 1 inch wheel also, but with a 1/4 inch wheel shim. Switching it up a little bit from how I originally had it because I did have some rubbing. Now right here you can see all this melted plastic and stuff. This is the major spot the tire was rubbing on this guy right here. So what we're going to do is take the heat gun, heat it up, and slice it off right behind this plastic rivet, and hopefully that'll fix that there. I also am not running a whole lot of PSI. I'm running 6 PSI all the way around. In the front, I do have a lot of rubbing when I steer all the way, so I'm going to do some skid plate trimming and some other trimming, and hopefully I'll show you how we make that a little better. But you're not going to be able to turn full lock with a 33 on this machine because it has a pretty wide frame. And you know, why don't you just put more offset, move the tire out away from the frame? Well, that helps move away from the frame, but it also makes it swing more, and that doesn't do good things for handling, and it'll actually make it rub the fender right there more. So we're gonna get it as good as we can. I'll let you know how I made it work. The way it is now, it was pretty doable. I just had mostly rubbing right here, and I did have a passenger. Okay, so heating that plastic with the heat gun, I was able to trim it. It cuts like butter once you get a little bit warm. Took off about maybe 1/3 of an inch there, and a little bit here because it was rubbing slightly. And now this tire should not rub at all on the rear with this 1 inch wheel spacer. I'm looking at everywhere else it could be touching, and I don't see any other signs of rubbing. So I think we're good to go. That's really the major spot you got to trim in the rear, this guy. And while you're in here, you might as well trim this a little bit too, because it overhangs this bottom part of the fender. As you can see, the paint is just barely scraped off this bar right here, which means it wasn't really rubbing it. That was just, you know, weeds and dirt slinging against it. But also this bar slopes forward. So as I move the tire out with this spacer, it's gonna fix that problem too. Pretty good tire clearance on this thing. They definitely set it up to run a 32 from the factory. All right, so on the right side of the vehicle, this coolant line is in the danger zone. That's where your tire wants to turn into. So if you try to trim it like I did, your coolant line's kind of exposed. So I'm gonna try actually rerouting that coolant line a little bit. You can see how it's kind of tied onto that aluminum, I don't know, little growth piece, and that kind of holds it off the engine. I'd like it to fit closer against the engine. So I'm gonna play with it a little bit, and I'll show you guys what I figure out. Just wanted to show you what it looks like before I mess with it. Also, if you pull off this piece, which only has a few clips in it, I added some zip ties to mine, but you can easily get to your snorkel boots. Very nice access on this machine so far. I've already done it once to tighten them up, but it's good to check those pretty frequently because that's where they come loose, is right there at the engine typically. All right, that was a pretty easy mod, and I was able to move the coolant hose back an inch. So you can see how it looks now. It used to sit up on here on one of these little plastic pedestals, kind of holding it off that bracket. Now I got it tucked on the side of it, just secured with one zip tie through there, one zip tie that goes through this hole and this hole. That's pretty good. And then I moved it in a little bit over here with a regular zip tie. This whole section of the hose was just flopping around, so I added a zip tie here to keep that from being so floppy, because that's going to cause issues eventually. And I think that's a pretty good mod. Now I've got to find a way to get a little more clearance around this guy. I'm probably going to drill out and remove this tang right here, and then I'm going to tap this little bracket in and fold that in a little bit, and then cut off the skid plate from here to here, and that should get me a little more steering angle, and it'll protect the brake line and the coolant line from the tire. Yes, I did dump a little bit of coolant. You can see how I had to kind of adjust how the line sat on that nipple, so I took the clamp off. So I got to remember to top off my coolant system when I'm all done with this. There's the final product. So trimmed this some more, relocated the brake line with a zip tie, drilled out that rivet, hammered that to fold it in a little bit towards the motor. Another zip tie here to kind of pull this plastic towards it. And I think that should be pretty far away from the tire. I also cut the skid plate. You can see there's a notch missing out of here. That's this piece right here. I cut that out. Pretty thick plastic skid plate. And I'll let the tire swing in another 1/4 of an inch to the frame. So hopefully that'll make it a little less annoying. If it does rub, it won't be rubbing plastic that's going to flap around. The tire will just rub the frame itself. All right, so there's the tire on with those mods. I'm actually able to get very close to full lock, which is excellent. It is a pretty wide frame, but if you do what I did there, you can get a lot more out of it. So you can see I'm clearing the plastic all the way now. And the thing I'm actually rubbing is the frame. I would zoom in more, but I'll lose flash. But yeah, so that's pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Improvement there. And of course, the ATV is at full down travel now, so this is a worst case scenario for rubbing the inside. It'll be better once it sags. So remember guys, if you're gonna try to copy this, wheel offset is key. If you get some zero offset wheels, some 3.5, 3.5s, it's not gonna work at all. You gotta run factory type offset. Everyone puts these massive tires and ends up having to chop all their plastic off because they put too much outward offset. Don't do that. Don't be that guy. I know you kids think it looks cool, but it's stupid on so many levels. It's almost the same story on the left side of the machine. There are no brake lines or coolant lines to worry about or relocate, but I did cut a big piece out of here. I added a zip tie here, and you can see there's 3 holes because I wanted to put it to where it pushes this back, makes it curve away from the tire as much as possible so the tire can't grab onto this. So that's why that hole's there and those 2 holes aren't used. And I also just trimmed straight down like I did on the other side. It's very easy with the heat gun. Heat it up a little bit and it'll slice through it like butter. And then again, trim the skid plate like that. There's the piece that came off the skid plate. And that should let the tire swing all the way and rub the frame. And then I tapped this with a hammer. So same process as the other side. Just wanted to reiterate it because I know I'm gonna get questions regardless. All right guys, there's the aftermath of all that trimming. I do think it was a good mod. I can cut it pretty sharp now and I don't notice a bunch of rattling and popping. Once it does rub, you can just hear the tire smacking the frame. It's a lot less annoying than shaking all your plastics and knocking your body clips out. So I think that got me a good amount of clearance with just the trimming and the 1/4 inch spacer on the 6+1 HG9 bead locks, which are 6+1 offset. You see that 1/4 inch spacer there. So good mod overall. Gonna make it a lot less annoying on tight trails. I can get to full lock, but it does rub. But you can use it if you need to, right? I'll just fold the knobbie over this tire. Pretty cool. All right, so I've had some rubbing right here on this frame bar. Nothing I can do about that with trimming. So I got the ATV parked where this tire has very little weight on it. Actually 0 weight. It's leaned over in this water hole like this. And it comes with an adjuster. And I'm very easily able to just put this on the shock and crank up the preload. Boom. 33s are a little too big to run this bike, honestly. The rear tire is rubbing right here slightly, and the front tire rubs in a couple places. It rubs that floorboard support bar, it rubs the plastic right there, and it rubs the frame when you turn. So a 32 would be a lot more reasonable, but I love the 18-inch wheel and not floating, so I'm gonna make it work. I'm gonna find a way to put a little bit of lift on it. I maxed out the preload at Holopaw. Each shock had 2 more clickers to go, and then it was maxed out. That helped with the rubbing, but now the front end's really bouncy and it feels topped out, meaning the wheel drops down and uses up all the travel. So I'd like to lift the front a little bit, but as you can see, there's already a lot of angle on these CV joints because the diff's mounted up pretty high. So I gotta see what I can get out of it. The shock mount's also a little goofy. Everything's kind of cantilevered off the frame like an X3 on the sucker. That's the little plastic shock cap that keeps falling off of these things. But I might try to find a way to do a little bit of lift because just maxing out the preload, it didn't have enough extra down travel, and it really needs a little more rebound dampening.